this lesson today, we're going to look at solving a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula and answering in simplest radical form. I should have added that word here. So instead of answering as a decimal, an integer or decimal, we're actually going to look at leaving our answer in simplest radical form. Okay, so let me zoom in a little bit. So I just want to look at just a couple of examples without the quadratic formula first. We've already done simplified radicals like the square root of 48. Remember, we look for perfect squares within it. This is just one way to do it. There are lots and lots of other ways to think about simplifying radicals. And so the square root of 16 is 4, and so it'd simply be 4 the square root of 3. We should already know how to do that. Okay, now looking at number 2, some things I want to remind you is that we can only simplify inside with inside and outside with outside. That's just a little trick to think about, but what I'm saying is radicands with radicands, coefficients or non-radicands with non-radicands, okay? So for example, in this problem, I cannot say 24 divided by 8. One is inside the radical, one is not. One is a radicand, one is a not. So I can't do that. I could simplify 4 and 8. Both of them are outside the radical. So let's go ahead and do that. 4 goes into both of these, and so it'd be the square root of 24 over 2. Okay, but I hope you're thinking, well, Miss Adams, the square root of 24, 24 has some perfect squares in it. That breaks down to 4 times 6. So that would be 2 the square root of 6 over 2. So now do we have more that we can simplify? Yes, we can simplify my 2's, not my 6, because it's the only radicand that we have. So my 2's would cancel out, and so simplest radical form would be the square root of 6. Okay, so here's another one. So one thing I want to point out on this one is we cannot simplify 2 and 4. We've now thrown in an adding sign here. So both terms, so 2 is a term, square root of 56 is a term. Both terms have to be divisible by the denominator. Okay, now as you progress through this, your denominator might be a binomial as well, but we're only going to look at monomials in the denominator for right now. So right now, the way it is, nothing can happen. Okay, but 56 can be broken down into 14 times 4. So now this is 2 plus 2 the square root of 14 over 4. And so what I want you to see now is both terms have a number that's divisible by 4, or have a common factor as 4. 14 is not going to get touched. It's inside. Everything else is outside. So 2 goes into all of these numbers. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So simplest radical form would be 1 plus the square root of 14 over 2. Okay, and so this is what we're going to kind of be looking at as we look at the quadratic formula. Okay, so now we're going to solve these equations using the quadratic formula. We're going to write our answer in simplest radical form. And so hopefully you remember how to do the quadratic formula. If you want, you could kind of pause the video and fill in your quadratic formula. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. And so that's what it would look like if we filled it in. Okay, so now we've got 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 plus 4 divided by 2. And so then this is 7 plus or minus the square root of 53 divided by 2. And so let's look at this. Nothing right now has a common factor. 53 is a prime number. It has no perfect squares within it. And so we are finished. This would be simplest radical form. This would be your answer. Okay, let's look at number 5. Okay, again, we're going to fill in our formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Okay, so this would be positive 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 plus 72 over 12. So then keeping going over here, 2 plus or minus the square root of 76 over 12. Okay, so remember, you still cannot simplify 2 and 12. Both terms have to be divisible by 12. And right now, there's no coefficient right here. We cannot simplify 76 and 12. Inside, outside. Doesn't work. But 76 will break down to 4 times 19. So that means this would be 2 plus or minus 2 the square root of 19 over 12. And now we can. Now they both have an outside number. Both terms have an outside number that we can reduce with the 12. 2 goes into all of these. This becomes 1. This becomes 1. This becomes 6. So x equals 1 plus or minus the square root of 19 over 6. Okay. Okay, I want to look at one more. First thing we need to do with this one is we need to make sure that we put it in standard form. It's got to be equal to 0 if we're going to use the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4 times 1 times c all over 2 times 1. Okay, so this would be 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 16 over 2. And so we have 8 plus or minus the square root of 48 over 2. Again, nothing we can do yet at this point. 16 breaks down to 16 times 3. So that would be 4 the square root of 3 over 2. And now I can simplify all of those outside numbers. Everything is evenly divisible by 2. And so this would be 4 plus or minus 2 the square root